Basic neumes and pneumatic elements, Part 3, three-note groups. Review from Part 2. What is the effect of the epicema on a group of notes? On a group of cursive notes? What is the melodic contour of the pes? What is the melodic contour of the clivis? What letters in the manuscript signify augmentation, diminution? The epicema doubles a group of notes. It makes a group of cursive notes non-cursive. The pes signifies two pitches, the first low and the second high. The clivis signifies two pitches, the first high and the second low. Augmentation or lengthening is signified by the letter A or T in the manuscripts. Diminution is signified by C or N. Take a moment to review the abbreviations and figures from parts 1 and 2. In this third segment, we come to what is arguably the most controversial point in this series, the ordinary rhythm of cursive three-note groups. Opinion 1. Three-note cursive groups are entirely short when followed by a new syllable, that is, at the end of a neume. Opinion 2. Three-note cursive groups are short-long when followed by a new syllable. The second opinion has rather steadily gained ground among musicologists for several decades, especially those who have studied the two 10th century folios from Nota, Italy, containing 25 chants. The introduction to the first edition of the Liber Hymnarius, published by Solem in 1983, articulated the principle that the last note of a short or cursive neume tends to regain the normal syllabic value, which is relatively long. The editors, possibly including Dom Cardin himself, refer to this as the resumed or recovered syllabic value. Mensuralists or proportionalists almost unanimously interpret the final note of three-note groups as usually long. The scandicus is a group of three ascending notes, normally short-long, but sometimes entirely long. I encourage you to trace the shape of the neumes with your right hand. You may discover that although their written appearance is often very different, the Messine and St. Gall neumes fundamentally indicate the same gestures. It is not my intention to present an exhaustive list of every possible combination of notes, but rather to present the building blocks, as it were, and introduce the principles of how they are combined and organized into a whole. Although the two puncta are equivalent to a short pes, or pes rotundus, the two figures shown here are not rhythmically equivalent. The latter is considered a partially cursive form, with the rhythm short, long, long, because of the expressive pneumatic break between the pes and the virga. The recognition of the underlying principle differentiating these two notations is generally regarded as one of Dom Cardin's most important contributions to Gregorian studies. The note preceding a pneumatic break is normally long unless it is a low note, both preceded and followed by higher notes. The quilisma scandicus has a quilisma in place of the middle note. Refer to Part 1 for the interpretation of the quilisma itself. The lowest note is long because it is marked long in the manuscripts, not because it is followed by a quilisma. The salicus is like the scandicus, but with an oriscus for its middle note. Metz frequently writes a scandicus where St. Gall writes a salicus, yet despite this reciprocity, Dom Maquereau interpreted the salicus as short, long, short. Along with the short and indivisible normal syllabic value and the epicema marking only the first note of a pes or clivis, the salicus is another remarkable error in the Solem method, which, we should add, has nothing to do with the pure Vatican edition itself. The Solem editions also erroneously interpret the top note of both scandicus and salicus as short. The climacus is a group of three descending notes. In Part 1, we mentioned that the St. Gall virga may be either long or short, according to context. In the St. Gall climacus, the virga has the same value as the following note, short if unmarked and followed by a punctum, or long if followed by a tractulus, or if marked with an epicema or significative letter. Remember that in the Messine neumes, the virga is long unless marked with C, which is rare. Like the long clivis, the convention followed by the Messine scribe is to use a tractulus or unsinus for the top note when the second note is also long. The torculus has the contour low, high, low. The long and short forms are depicted here. The porrectus has the contour high-low-high, the inversion of the torculus, but it can also be high-low unison. The Vatican edition uses a special swooping figure only for this pneumatic element. A minority of performers give the porrectus an ornamental interpretation akin to a mordent in Baroque music. When we compare the Messine notation of the torculus and porrectus, we see that they are, for all intents and purposes, the mirror image of each other, with the exception of the unison porrectus variant, which proves the rule, or at least reinforces it. Should an ornamental interpretation of one not imply the same for the other two? Like the pes initio debilis, there is the torculus initio debilis, also called a special torculus, which is a clivus with a lower auxiliary. Keinsbauer has proposed the terminology clivus urgens. Metz actually has a special notation to indicate this figure, as do some of the other French manuscripts. In the Vatican edition, the pressus major is transcribed as a straightforward doubling of the upper note of the clivus. In the manuscripts, the repeated note is an oriscus. In the Solemn method, a theoretical distinction is made between the authentic pressus and the pressus of assimilation, a double note at the conjunction of two opposed pneumatic elements, but the rendition is exactly the same in practice. The pressus of assimilation depicted here is clearly a four-note figure, but it is presented here for the purpose of comparison with the pressus major, clivus strophica, and clivus with oriscus studied in this lesson. There are three ways in which the lower note of a clivus may be doubled in the manuscripts, all indistinguishable from one another in the Vatican edition. 1. By writing it as a porrectus, already mentioned above. 2. By the addition of a stropha, properly a clivus strophica. And 3. By the addition of an oriscus, properly a clivus with oriscus and apposition. Trigon is the name given to other pneumatic elements that involve repetition of an open note. In the Vatican edition, the most typical form is indistinguishable from a pressus. In this and the following lesson, we focus on cursive and partially cursive forms. The analogous non-cursive form should be immediately recognizable to anyone who has diligently studied parts 1 and 2.